Tell us about this op-ed.
Yeah. So that op-ed is the idea that it's the page opposite the editorial comment page, and
in sense of content.
Yes, its primary role is to provide the forum for intensive debate between intellectuals, policymakers, experts of one form or another. Most of them are not journalists. Most of them are academics and think tankers, some of whom move in and out of journalism, some of whom move in and out of politics. But the classic now is Paul Krugman in the New York Times, right?
Yes.
Nobel Prize winner in economics, but he writes like a dream. He writes beautifully, 750 words probably, once a week in the New York Times, and it's really strong. The FT tries to do the same sort of thing. Keep the debate lively, up to the minute, full of new ideas or looking at old things in new ways.
How do you see the difference between the main competitor of which are Financial Times and New York Times? Why would people to select one or another? What a difference position?
Right, interesting question. The New York Times is probably the most beautifully written daily newspaper in the world.
Eloquent.
In the English language. Beautifully constructed stories, very long, researching, well edited, and so on. But its news agenda is less economic and financial than the FT. The FT, despite its name, Financial Times, doesn't define its agenda as financial. It defines its agenda as all those things happening in the world which are very important for policymakers, including businessmen, that they should know about, right? And should know about in depth and with understanding. And of course, the world being the world, much of that is economics and business.
There is also a very nice section at weekends of Financial Times.
Yes.
And how do you compare that weekend issues with the ordinary days issues, and does it change? Does it sway your audience?
Yes. Well, my last 4 years at the FT, I worked in the weekend section as the editor of the Color magazine.
Wonderful sections, by the way.
Thank you. And I loved it. I had 17 years in daily news, and then the last 4 years in what might be called literary journalism, which I loved. Telling stories, long stories, still journalism, in a narrative form. Covering books, arts, theatre. It was wonderful, and the audience was quite different in some respects. The overlap was probably about 60–70%, but it's the FT's readership at leisure, and they wanted to be intelligently entertained.
International Herald Tribune. Those are three newspapers you will find obviously every morning in any global city. In terms of International Herald Tribune, how do you see the difference?
Well, the Herald Tribune being the sort of international edition of the New York Times, since the New York Times bought out the Washington Post's share, it is essentially the New York Times without the American bias. So its world agenda is also quite strongly economic. I mean, they do a lot of economic reporting. I think, but they still, it's still the slightly softer, still the slightly more political side of things than the Financial Times is.
Well, while you are here this time and last time, you obviously have seen Mongolian content in English, which is not that big. And I think our exporters are not able to receive fresh news in English all the time. In that sense, what do you see the future of English paper in the country?
Well, I would imagine that over time there will be greater demand for news and understanding, if you like, which is going beyond news into analysis and to the op-ed type sort of thing I was talking about. Greater demand for that in English, not because everybody is English, but because Germans read English and Swedes read English and Chinese will read English. So there will be a cosmopolitan, as it were, demand for information about Mongolia that's not in Mongolian, because not many of us read it. So I would have thought there's scope for that.
Can you compare with, obviously, with Bangkok Post?
Yeah.
And there's The Nation, also another English newspaper.
So two English language papers.
What are their difference and interaction with other local Thai language newspaper in Thailand?
Well, both of them are regarded as being more serious, with more balanced news agenda than the Thai media, which is a bit more anarchic and more inclined to mix comment in the middle of news and so on. So both the Bangkok Post and The Nation are seen as being the more reliable sources. The Bangkok Post slogan is the newspaper you can trust. And so more than 60% of the Bangkok Post's readership is actually Thai.
Who are they?
Yeah, because they would rather read it than the Thai media, which they trust less.
Oh, I see. See, now the newspaper actually on a paper and virtual, online.
Yeah.
How do you see the future, and what is going on now in terms of the mainstream global newspaper and the sort of local newspaper?
Well, I wish I knew, because everybody's trying to find out what this is, but I think there's more and more evidence now that that newspapers are not going to disappear, but online is going to increasingly become the way in which people receive their information. I mean, if you look at an iPad, which I've done, and just pick up the New York Times on iPad, it's fabulous. It's great to read. And the fact that it's electronic means that you have instant archiving. You can link and connect in ways that you can't with a newspaper. Rupert Murdoch, who knows what he's talking about, he's been in this business a long time and he's made a lot of success out of it. He's saying that these e-readers, iPads, are actually transforming the world of journalism, and that's where he's putting a lot of his attention. And I think that'll be the case. There will still be people who like to open their newspaper over a cup of coffee. I'm one of them. But I can tell you, I do more of my reading online than I do in physical form.
Who are you?
Yeah, I read I can get the Financial Times in Bangkok in paper form, but I take it online because I love the idea that if I want to read more about the thing I'm reading, I just click.
Anytime when you need.
Yeah, but if I'm physically holding the newspaper, I can't, right? So it's the information I want, when I want it, where I want it. You know, I'm in my 50s. You know, those people who are in their 30s probably haven't ever picked up a newspaper.
Okay. Well, you have done a wonderful job for Mongolian journalism and journalists. And had I understand great days in Mongolia.
I've enjoyed it enormously. It's been great. I love talking about newspapers, and I love talking about newspapers with intelligent, bright, talented people, and it's been like that all week.
Thank you very much for visiting us and doing such a good contribution towards better journalism in this country.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Таны төлөө эх орн чинь юу хийж чадах вэ гэж асуухаас өмнө та өөрөө эх орныхон төлөө юу хийж чадах вэ гэж асуу. Young Federal